Hello and welcome to the 6th episode of the NetScaler podcast. My name is Brian Huhn, and I'm joined by my co-host, Jason Poole. Together, we explore the ins and outs of application delivery and security, deep dive into stories from the industry, and learn about the business challenges that face IT teams and how they overcome them. Jason, can you introduce our guest for today?
Thank you, Brian. Yes, and just before I do, we're going to talk a little bit about security today. So the application is becoming more important than ever for businesses. Businesses literally rely on them to function. A 2023 survey by Deloitte and MuleSoft found that an average business might have 1,061 applications, and that's up from 976 on their previous year's survey, which I think seems a little high, and perhaps a more realistic is Okta's Business at Work report, which cites a more reasonable 187 applications on average. But in any case, all these applications represent a potential threat vector, and these applications must be secure. And in today's podcast, we'll look at some of the issues at stake for organizations and how ADCs can help mitigate the application security risk. Today, we're joined by an old friend, Mads Petersen, all the way from Denmark. Mads is a long-time NetScaler partner with a strong focus on application security. Mads, have I got the introduction right? How long have you had this ADC and security interest?
Hey, Brian and Jason, thank you for having me, first of all. Just quick introduction. I've been doing Citrix for over 20 years, and I started out as a classic Citrix guy, MetaFrame and all of that stuff. And then at some point I decided, well, NetScaler is going to be my core focus. So I've been doing purely NetScaler for 13 years. So, and once I took that shift, I started to see applications more, because in a classic Citrix, we get the framework, we get the applications to run, but we don't interact as much with the application. But when you move over to NetScaler, you need to know a lot more about the applications. All of that has led me to learn a lot more about security and get an interest in it, because with a lot of the applications running on NetScaler, they were web-based, and we see a lot of web attacks. So that really gave me an interest in security. So right now I am focused on NetScaler purely, but with a security mind. So all of that needs to be handled. We handle on the NetScaler, security, identity, and all of that stuff. So that's a little about me.
It's good to hear that people see the light and shift and jump boats and come across to the NetScaler. And I think you're right. You can live within the ecosystem of Citrix and never sort of move outside that bubble. But absolutely, once you start talking about NetScaler, you need to interact with so many different moving parts in the network and in the application. You're absolutely right, and I see that all the time. And it's good that you've got that security background, and that's been your interest. And I think this is great, because every time you look in the news today, I mean, in mainstream news, there's a new security breach. Just last week, Anthropic, the ChatGPT rival, had a small data leak. Also in January, Trello reported 15 million users of their project management software had their details leaked into the dark web. In December, Norton Healthcare reported a data breach of 2.5 million records. And we all know the big ones. LinkedIn in 2021, 700 million records. Alibaba in 2019, 1.1 billion. The big baby, Yahoo in 2018, 3 billion data records. And I was reading only last week that the mother of all breaches, or at least the collation of all the data of all the breaches, 26 billion records in one place on the dark web, 12 terabytes of data. That's an enormous amount. And all of these things are exfiltrated from usually from weakened applications or something like that. So Mads, I suppose my question to you is, as a security professional, are you seeing more attacks today than before? And are your customers finally taking security more seriously?
I think we spot more attacks now than we did before. And I'm sure there is a trend going upwards in the amount of attacks we're seeing globally, but I also think that comes down to the kind of applications that we run today compared to 10 years ago, where we are more cloud-based and more web-based in general. We need to get deployed fast and quickly. So I think we're seeing more attacks. I can see when I look at the customers that I handle that we are seeing a lot of attacks going on, and most of them, they are just what I call internet noise. So script kiddies trying to do directory attacks and all of that stuff. And we see that a lot. And especially this last month, I've had a lot of customers saying, oh, we see a lot of weird usernames in our logs all the time. So it seems like there is a trend going up with directory attacks right now, trying to get access that way into it. So yeah, I think that's that's an upgoing trend. But it also comes down to that technology is a lot more available now today. It is a lot easier to find a way to attack a system than it was 10 years ago, because so much data is being shared now, and we get a lot of people that grown up with the internet. So it's becoming something that it doesn't take a rocket science to execute an attack on someone. And I think a lot of these attacks are just script kiddies trying to see if it's possible. Because as soon as you put something that is accessible from the internet, someone will try to do something about it. They will try to see if there's a back way, is something misconfigured, can I get access in some way? And most of these attacks are not something that is so worrying. It is just internet noise, in my opinion. And then you have those that are very targeted. So you have to difference in what kind of attacks you're seeing.
So a lot of the attacks are noise, but are you also seeing more sustained attacks, more serious attacks as well? Or you're hopefully you're seeing them and you're blocking them?
We are seeing. It's not that internet noise is not something you have to be worried about, because all of these attacks, they put a strain on the system. They test your security posture and all of that stuff, so you have to handle it. But they are like the low-hanging fruit. So it is a little easier to manage. But we are seeing more targeted attacks, more sophisticated attacks, where I'm especially seeing a lot of not SQL injections, but different database attacks where they're trying to access different databases. SQL injection is always there, but also other kind of databases where you can see they try to query it. And if I look at the logs at my customers right now, we are seeing a lot of those. Also, when it comes into API, because everything is API related today, we are seeing a lot of trying to reuse incorrect barrow tokens and all of that stuff, trying to see if they can attack it that way. So I see a lot of that stuff in my logs right now. It's fun to notice, but it's also a little worrying that I mean, it's good that the security products work, but it's also scary how much stuff is actually going out there. And I think a lot of companies are not even aware of how much they are being attacked because they don't log it correctly.
You know, kind of on that topic, before we get too deep into how this protection happens, I kind of want to make sure we all understand the stakes here of application security. And I want to ask you, Mads, what are the impacts of having poorer application security, in your opinion?
One of the worst things is a threat actor getting access into your network and stealing your core business stuff. So your source code is getting leaked or your business secrets is getting leaked. That is something that is in worst case scenario. But we're also seeing something a little more where people think that's not as impactful, but something like, if you have a web shop and you have attackers or bots in this case will try to say, I want to buy this item. So every item will go out of stock because there is a buy order, so they don't sell more than they have stock in. All of those stuff, all of those kind of attacks can have a negative impact on your business without any harm really being done. But it's just a bot or some other organization or a competitor that is trying to attack you. And I've seen that stuff happen.
So that's more abuse of a system, not necessarily. I mean, the bot attacks tend to be more about abuse of things that are allowed. But But what's the impact on a business of an attack? Have you had, maybe you've got some examples, you don't have to share the customer names, but if someone's attacked, what do they do? Or what happens? What's
Well, in most cases, when I see they're attacked, it is to try to get a foothold into the organization. So often it's not even that they want to attack that specific web application, but they want to attack it to put down a shell so they can get access into it, and then they want to spread out in the organization. And this could be to do ransomware, for example, or what we're seeing more now is data exfiliation. Is that
exfiltration?
Yeah, where they steal the data first, and then they might also do encryption of the data. So they also want to extort you and get some money, so get some ransomware in that way. That's the main attacks that we have seen the last couple of years. They have been attacks that have somehow tried to get a foothold into the organization, and then they have tried to encrypt the data.
So they're after money. There's a financial impact to the customer in this respect, whether they pay or not. I don't know, but there's...
Yeah, I mean, when I look at some of the customers that have been hit by this, it's not even, let's say they win, then you should never pay the ransom, because you should never pay to get your files unlocked again. But that is not even the biggest cost of this. That is getting the whole system up and running again. It has a huge financial impact on the organization, and it takes a lot longer than most organizations think. So I've been in meetings where they've said, I mean, we expect to be up and running in a week. That's just not going to happen if everything got encrypted. Sometimes it takes a very long time. And that has a huge financial impact, both on how much it will cost in external consultants, how much revenue they're losing because they are not able to, even if they get some of the systems up and running, they're not able to work as they normally do. And they might need to increase their security and do a whole new AD tiering and separate accounts and all of that stuff. So it is, sadly, a lot of companies, they don't see the light before they get attacked. So some of them are not willing to spend money on proper security before they get attacked.
Sure. And just to kind of paint, a little bit more hard data around that, IBM actually quoted the average cost of the data breach to be $4.45 million. And that's up from 4.35 as of last year. And, this, we believe covers all the aspects of the cleanup, getting services back on. And, this is the average, but, we've actually seen higher estimates elsewhere in other reports. And then, Jason, go ahead.
Yeah, so no, you're absolutely right. And Mads, I think you raise it, often, it's not just the cleanup, it's the downtime.
Yes.
The downtime costs, I forget who it was, the Aberdeen group, they quoted some time ago that it was $8,500 per hour. And more recently, the Datto estimated that the cost of downtime can vary from $10,000 per hour to more than $5 million per hour. So perhaps it's not in, that's not every customer, but that's a pretty big range. And I know we've certainly got other customers who talked to us and said, we've been very happy to see that something has stayed up and not gone down because we've got a DR site or whatever after an attack, and we've been able to continue to do our business. But then you mentioned something else. So once that data's out there, or if it's encrypted, they pay the ransom or they don't. But I know in Europe at least, there's GDPR, and if you've got a data breach, you can expect a big hefty fine. Have you come across that in any of your customers, again, without naming names?
Not a direct fine, more like a raised, you need to get a better control of that. But in Denmark and in Europe, they're working on something called NIS2, where the board of directors can actually
They're liable?
They're reliable for what happens, so they can get personally, something happened to your company, but it is your responsibility, so we can find you directly to try to put pressure on the guys in the top to also make sure that everything is up to date and up and running and all of that stuff.
So what do your customers think about that? About it?
I mean, it's when you get put an extra responsibility on you, it is like they're forcing people to do something about it. So I'm not in a position where I could be liable for it myself. But what I'm hearing is that people are happy that we're doing something about it, or that they're doing something about it. Cool. What they say behind closed doors is I'm not sure.
No, it's interesting. I mean, if we look at the fines and some of the big data breaches, I had read that Equifax was hit with a $550 million fine, at least, in 2017 after it was found liable for not fixing a critical vulnerability months after a patch came out. You might say, well, that's fair enough. But like you say, that's not any one particular person, and that money just goes into presumably some sort of regulatory body or governmental coffers and just gets lost, I suppose. There doesn't feel like there's someone actually taking responsibility about it. And similarly, T-Mobile was hit with a $350 million fine in 2022 following their big breach in 2021. So the fine aspect, it's quite an impact. It really is. But one other thing that I've noticed, and I go back to the Sony hack of years ago, and all their movies, so there's the financial impact of how do you release these movies if everyone's pirated them? But also the reputation. Would you put your credentials, your credit card details in Sony again? Possibly not. How do you put a price on that, though?
I think it's a little, because I have that. My opinion is everyone will be subject to some kind of vulnerability at some point. They happen. How you handle it, if you've been breached, tells you a lot about the company. And I also think that if the vulnerability is important enough, if you don't act within a certain amount of time, then you should be held reliable. So if the government or the government or whoever will give out the fines will say, well, you will get a personal fine now because you're the CEO. I mean, hopefully that will put pressure on them to take it more seriously.
So it's important for all companies to really take this seriously. The impact in terms of finance, legal, reputation are all huge. And it's time that the business world woke up and started to take this seriously. And hopefully they will do that now. And they'll employ people like you and use products like NetScaler to come in and protect those applications.
Yeah, and some of the stuff that we have seen before is that if you needed to get a certain certification to be PCI compliant or something, it said you needed an application firewall. It never stated that it had to be configured or how it had to be configured. So a lot of companies sadly just got an application firewall, put it on, put it in logging mode, and then they hit a check mark and said, well, it's configured. So
that is an excellent point. The compliance and the regulations stipulate things to a letter, and people follow the letter, not the spirit. I remember in my youth selling firewalls. I'm not going to name the vendor, and they had a version that was certified secure with common criteria, and so every government agency wanted that one. However, that was now 2 or 3 years out of date, and the newer firewalls and software that went on them were much more secure. They fixed new holes, but people were still buying these older ones because that's what the paperwork said they had to have. Does that still go on?
I mean, there are still companies out there that will look for certain certificates and all of that stuff, but in my opinion, I know how hard it is to get like something like common criteria badge on your appliance. It is time consuming. It costs a lot of money for the vendors. I would much rather have that they spend that money on improving the product. Like you said, they had newer versions out that had fixed holes and all of that stuff, which in my opinion is a much better product, but it didn't have the common criteria. So I still think it goes on, especially with compliance, that, oh, we just have to do this, then we get a check mark. But doesn't make any sense if it's not configured correctly. So
Mads, to your point of, the increasing responsibility and accountability for securing these apps, what is it that you think that's happening in the application space that's heightening this need for application security? Or rather, perhaps, what's making it more difficult to provide application security nowadays?
I think that the world as it is now is just moving so fast. The time from idea to when you want to have a deployment and start earning money on that idea is so low today. In the old days, like 10 years ago, we could spend months on setting up a new system and all of that stuff. That doesn't happen today. You need to move very quickly, and sadly, I feel sometimes corners are cut. And if you also look at code today, one of my biggest issues or things that I want is that it is much easier to build in security when you're building the application and setting it up and getting all of that done correctly than adding security afterwards. Security should never be an afterthought. It should be something that is embedded in your deployment of applications. And right now, if you look at a lot of coders, and I do it myself, we go to Stack Overflow and find something that looks like the code we need, and then we maybe modify it a little, or we use some kind of framework for someone that has deployed a framework for us to use, and no one ever does code validation, really. So
that's an interesting, but you raise a couple of interesting points there. Code reuse and using code from unknown sources, and it may be vulnerable, and of course Log4j sort of typified that, didn't it? But also you said about the speed. I think that's an interesting point. I just want to pick up on that. So a lot of businesses, they want the flexibility and the agility to change things quickly. So a lot are moving towards a different architecture for their applications. And, they're using microservices because you want a new feature, you build a new microservice and you link it in with a network call. That is fantastic in theory. However, is it more secure or less secure? And that's a debate for another day. So we're not going to go down that road. But this is really transforming businesses. We're starting to see a lot more. I think O'Reilly did a survey, said that 3/4 of businesses are adopting microservices-based architectures. And IDC estimated that there'll be 750 million new apps based on cloud-native technology by 2025. That's an enormous number of applications. And if, as you say, people are cutting and pasting code from Stack Overflow and not validating it, and let's face it, developers are paid for features, not for security, unfortunately, no matter how much better it is to build in from the start. But do you see then that this new architecture being more difficult to secure?
I'm not sure if it's more difficult to secure. I am just, my thing is this, it is different kind of people than the old traditional IT guys that are deploying this and deploying it fast. And the guys that have to manage it afterwards are in a lot of cases still the old guys, the ones that have done it for many years. And they get thrown a lot of new technologies into the mix, because we all know DevOps. I mean, they're supposed to develop it and they're supposed to handle the operations of it. But in most of the companies I look, it is purely just dev, and then they hand it off to someone else. And because of the speed in the development, they sometimes take in software that is not known within the organization, and they say, "Oh, you have to manage it." And then the organization says, "Well, we have no idea on how to manage this load balancer or this reverse proxy or whatever it was. So we'll just let it run." And because it is already in production now, someone posted, "It is production now. We need it. We can't put it down again." So I'm not sure if, microservices and all of these applications, they can be made secure. You can put a reverse proxy in front of them or sidecar and all of that stuff, so you can handle all of that stuff. It's just, I don't think that a lot of those topics goes into the conversation, sadly. It is almost always an afterthought.
So it's almost like the OWASP, I think it's number 4, insecure design, because they're not designing security in, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if you, so let's take a web application. If you have a web application where someone can put in an input somewhere, like you have a form or something, someone will try to put in something to see if they can break it or see if they can get access or get the backend server to throw some kind of error so we can get some information back to it. That is just about to happen. But if you have an input and you expect, let's say, a social security number, that is a well-defined structured number. So make sure that you take that as an input. So if someone puts in something that is not confined or not in the way that the social security number is supposed to be, then discard it. Just discard it and tell the user that you got an error instead of just trying to push it to the backend.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning into this Part 1 episode of the NetScaler podcast. A Part 2 of our interview with Mads Petersen will be coming soon. You can find our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or the NetScaler community website. You can also find the video version of this interview on YouTube. And if you're already here, leave us a comment on what you thought or what you might like to hear next. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.